Welcome to SEL in EDU.
where we discuss all things social and emotional in education.
I'm Krista.
I'm Craig, and we are your host on this journey.
This podcast is created in partnership with Pennsylvania ASCD.
Hey, SEL and EDU family. Ah, we are back. It is real spring outside right now. Got some blossoms. Krista, how are you holding up today?
I'm actually really fabulous. It was great seeing you pop on, Craig, because you just always put a smile on my face. You didn't even have to say anything, and you were just exuding this light when you popped in. And so I'm enjoying the spring weather, this warm weather. And interestingly, by the time we drop this, it might be closer to maybe fall because we take a little bit of time off in the summer. So I think looking back on this, I'm hoping it's going to be a good throwback to us remembering the spring weather and trying to harness that kind of energy we're at right now.
Well, one, the feeling is mutual in regards to just all the light emulated back and forth between us. We just do what we do. I am trying to be, some type of pseudo like decorator, outdoor decorator, and just kind of get my patio together because we have in less than a month from today, my partner, he will be graduating with his master's in divinity. And so like we got people coming from all over. And so trying to get the space ready for that, which is a month away. But between the two of us, we're so busy that I'm glad that I have a little bit of downtime to kind of start that stuff earlier. So
Yeah.
this is good.
And vitamin D is good for the soul. And yeah. And so, you know what? Our guest, I'm pretty sure also agrees about the sun and vitamin D because I know she gets a chance to travel all across the world. And we've met in some really cool locations lately. Just last September, we were able to spend some quality time with some of our dear friends, Tammy and Sheila in Hawaii. And so you're probably wondering who this is because I haven't said her name yet. We have Dr. Monica Burns with us. She is an ed tech and curriculum consultant, author of Ed Tech Essentials, and a former New York City public school teacher. She works with schools and organizations worldwide to support pre-K to 20, that's up through college educators, with thoughtful technology integration. Monica's website, classtechtips.com. You're going to want to go bookmark this right away in the beginning. classtechtips.com. And her Easy EdTech podcast helps educators place, quote, tasks before apps, which I love, by promoting deeper learning with technology. Welcome, Monica. We're so happy to get to chat with you on the podcast.
Thank you both so much for having me today.
I think one of the things that I get really excited about is seeing where you're going and who you're working with. And you really are able to work with such a wide range of people from around the world. Mm-hmm. I'm really curious, what are you seeing right now in terms of trends around technology in education and what that means for us as educators and for the students?
So after a lot of remote learning in lots of different places and people coming back together to share spaces and classrooms, there was a little bit of this step back, almost like an overcorrection, if you will, to all the different types of technology that was being used in classrooms. And I think some of that was very warranted, right? There's now that we're together, there's certain things we don't need the technology for that helped bridge that gap during remote learning. But some of it was a little bit of that, what I might say an overcorrection or just pushing things aside because we had different feelings associated with them, right? With harder times. So I think right now, one of the big things I'm seeing in the different spaces that I work with and the educators that I talk to is this, okay, we can take a deep breath now. Let's now say, what do we want to accomplish with digital tools, the access that we have? Maybe we're reordering things or revamping what we have access to. So that in the combination with conversations around artificial intelligence, which has been so big and in the news and in all the spaces. And those would be two areas that I'm seeing a lot of, just this coming back together to say, all right, maybe now we're ready to be intentional and thoughtful and think about technology integration. We have a little bit more distance. And then the other piece is, what are we going to do about AI? What does it mean for us? What is everyone talking about that's relevant for our everyday lives?
Wow. Well, as we speak, I actually I'm trying out a resource through K-12 leaders. I believe Monica, you're on
Mhm.
there as well. That For those who don't know, K-12 leaders, there's just folks from all over, the entire globe who are all here. This is a wonderful space, a community where educators, leaders, consultants, anyone who is connected to education in any way, are sharing resources, having conversations, and forming community around so many things. And one of the articles that I was reading earlier today was about GBT, AI, and I am currently there's a slide GBT that I was just playing with the tool just behind the scenes to see, okay, well, what in the world is this thing gonna create? And so I'm curious, from your work with schools in the course of the last year, schools, districts, whomever you've had the opportunity to really engage with, to really talk about, well, what are you hearing from educators and schools on the ground about AI and GBT and things like that?
So there's a few different things that have come up in conversations with educators around artificial intelligence and specifically this generative AI or the chatbot technology where we're asking a question and it's basically creating something new based on a prompt that we might give or a question with or without I say question thinking like with or without a question mark, right? Like, can you do this for me? Or here's what I want, right? And so in a lot of my conversations, I would say the majority of them have been around what can we all do as professionals to work smarter, not harder, to accelerate our workflow and to really get back our time capital, if you will, right? Our time so that we can reallocate it to other things. So this might be anything from give me some ideas for this kind of lesson, or what are some great resources to find primary source documents. So kind of like the questions we might Google, but more robust answers, or taking something that we do every day, like, I need to change this explanation so it's a little bit simpler or a shorter sentences, or I want to break down this paragraph of instructions into bullet points for a student or a family member I'm going to email later today. So those are the kind of things that we could do. It might just take us a little bit longer to do. We might be at the end of the day where things are not firing as quickly as they are during other times of the day, right? So that's the biggest area, my big focus of conversation. It's really around efficiency and kind of what I've always talked about, which is how to make ed tech, easier and use it to make our lives easier. And then the other piece of that I just had Richard Perry, who's a fellow Apple Distinguished Educator, on my Easy Ed Tech podcast a few in earlier this spring. It went up in April. And so for that one, we talked about classroom applications. He's an English teacher. What is he doing? And a lot of what he talks about is just getting kids talking about, do I even like this output? Or did the feedback it gave me make sense for what my real goal is here? So really just sparking conversations and using it as part of a writing process as opposed to give me the answer, which I think some people are coming to first with genuine concerns and fears and all the feelings, right? Just like we might have thought about Google 20 years ago or 15 years ago, that it was going to mean we couldn't teach anymore or something because kids were going to Google answers, which we know kind of how that landed.
I love that you bring that piece up there because in a previous life, I was an ed tech instructional coach. And so that's what I really liked your tasks before apps piece, because talking about what is the purpose of the technology that we're using? Not like, hey, this is some new thing, flashy, like, how can we incorporate it? But like, let's really be thoughtful about the learning outcomes and the learning process that happens while using these different tools. And so many people are, oh, here comes something else. And now what is this going to mean for our current learning?
Yeah.
Our times have evolved so quickly in the last couple decades. I just posted something up on Facebook and I know it's going to be hard because we don't record these anymore, but this mom was asking her daughter, who was born like 6 or 7 years ago, how do you talk on the phone? And she's holding up like to her ear. And she asks her son, who was born in 97, like, how do you talk on the phone? And he's got his thumb and his pinky
Yeah.
out next to and she says, "How do you take a picture?" And her daughter immediately went to a selfie, like the hand up, raised above the head. And I still don't know how to take selfies. I have to get up. I'm like, I don't know what the right angle is. And are these kids like know how to pose and present themselves? And then the son was looking at like kind of those digital cameras where you push the button on the top. And then, I remember having this
Yeah.
had the flash bulb that went off and you needed to Fisher Price flash bulb.
Right. Crank it back, right? I can right. Or like to go to the next frame, right? I don't even know what you would call that anymore. No, I totally understand.
And so I really appreciate your focus on how can we use this to help make life better for us. And you talked about, not just looking at it as, kids doing the work for them, but really thinking about those skills, the deeper learning that kids can access using these tools. And so I think that long piece to come down to people still, I think, have this fear that technology is going to hinder learning or hinder social emotional skills. And can you talk to how you see those two intersecting and coming together, and maybe what you have seen with technology, maybe either advancing or maybe you do think kind of some SEL skills we need to be more thoughtful about?
Yeah. So I just think it's really important to start off with acknowledging these very legitimate feelings that people have with all the new things that are coming their way. And as you mentioned, what feels faster and faster, right? So it's like we're on that big swing up, right? These things don't feel like they're happening. Oh, every couple years there's some big new piece of technology, but no, it's like nonstop, and it can feel very overwhelming, especially as everyone or most people are trying to wrap their head around what this really means. So when it comes to the SEL connection with some of these pieces that are moving pretty fast, like the chatbot style technology, I do think it's a great opportunity to talk about things that we might already talk about, but just in a different context. Like when I frame a question and I'm talking to a friend, like how does that feel? When I'm having a conversation with an adult in my life who I don't know very well, like how do I change my tone of voice or the words that I choose? Or when I'm about to put a question into something that I guess doesn't have feelings, right? Like what does that look like too, right? And I don't know that there's any one great answer for any of those things, but I really think there's a wonderful opportunity for thoughtful, deep discussions around interacting with these spaces. And you both might have been in this situation yourselves. I sometimes find myself telling Alexa, I'm like that the robot that won't be named in my house, right? Like, they respond to a question for me and I will say, thank you, right? Like I'm just trying to build in those like normal behavior so I don't lose the thank you when I ask someone a question right at the deli or at the airport or wherever I go. So I do think it's a real interesting space to have reflective conversations on, to spark discussion between students, and to really step back and reflect on like, how does this feel, this interaction, or how would I want this to be different, or how would I feel if I was the one answering these questions that were popping up all the time?
I'm curious, what has been a project or something you have been able to experience maybe the last month or two that has excited you and it's kind of gotten your juices flowing for like the advancement in ed tech?
Yeah. So, one of the things I've been excited about is just this idea of connecting some of the AI pieces to creativity in the classroom. I do a lot of work with creative tools and outputs and projects that students can be a part of. And I think there's really valid, very interesting conversations around what creativity looks like in a world where we can generate photos, right, by typing in a prompt somewhere, right? So one of the, I would say, more interesting types of projects or things I've been talking about with teachers just at the ASCD conference in Denver was one of the examples that I shared, was this idea of using generative AI like a ChatGPT to develop project exemplars that students can take a look at and then take a step back and say, does this line up with the rubric? Or what would I change here? Or this doesn't make sense, or that's not really what I was asking or what we would want to have. So I'll give you two examples that have this kind of creative spin that I think work well here. One is having the ChatGPT write out a scene that explains something. So I did one the other day to test it out that was write a scene from the show Friends where the characters talk about the Boston Tea Party, and by the end you understand what the Boston Tea Party is, right? And you could read it in their characters' voices, right? I tried it with the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. I said, talk about the French Revolution by the end, right? And you have all the characters in this voice that, because you've seen 100 episodes, right, you can kind of picture what it would look like. Of course, you tailor that to different groups of students and interest and experience, and it's a little bit different. We talk about those pieces, but that's one way to say, like, now let's look at this and say, like, do they actually give great facts about the Boston Tea Party? What do they talk about in the French Revolution here that's really missing that we would want to add into this conversation? So it's not like a one and done, but it becomes that starter for creative project that we want there to be multiple iterations of. That's what great creators do, is it's not just a first try, right? And another fun example is to do something to the tune of a song. Now, you could go really general, like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. I did one that was, talk about the abiotic and biotic factors of an ecosystem, like explain this to the tune of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Like, unbelievable, right? But then you can even get a little bit, I was choosing very specific, like Disney songs, and it would do it. And you could just sing along and do it, right? Like, you could play the music, Under the Sea, what would be a good one for maybe abiotic and biotic factors of an ecosystem. But, I did a couple from Disney movies that aren't even that as popular, right, as maybe The Little Mermaid or something. But those are the kind of creative things that I think are pretty exciting to say, this is not going to replace us, but this might just change the way we think about inspiration, feedback, the creative process, different iterations, and even just sharing information with students.
My mind is exploding with ideas that you've just shared, those two things. And it's getting me think from a social studies perspective, how could we examine an event from multiple perspectives according to the bot? But then analyzing that, not just, and I love that piece that you said a couple times. And so I just really want to make sure that people are hearing that this is the beginning of something, not the end. And so it's the analysis of it, the what can we do now? What do we agree with? What do we disagree with? What would we extend? But maybe looking at something from multiple perspectives and then analyzing and creating off of that. I'm also wondering, when we think about culturally responsive sustaining pedagogy, how can we pull in or ask students to think about things that are important in their lives, things that are meaningful culturally, linguistically, socially, and tie the content? So thinking about story or celebrations or music and things that are important to them, and how can they connect it in a meaningful way? And then maybe kind of alter that, and thinking about mnemonics, like if there's something really important that we're like, oh, you really do need to know this critical piece of content. You put that into a form that's going to resonate with those students. And so I'd love to hear from you or from Craig, because I know Craig too then talks about culturally relevant practices and reaching students and making things meaningful.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of things that I was holding on to. It was like, okay, well, what year did I actually create? I took a children's lit class for my master's program, and I winded up doing a rap about, some English lit text, like high school text. And I was like, I know I remember doing this, and this was back in 2001, and figuring out how do I integrate my love for hip hop with science. And so like that, I was sitting there like, oh, that was going on the back of my head. And what I found was I was able to do a similar project of digital storytelling with my young people. And so, I mean, we were using like PowerPoint. That was the slide technology. Like, that was the presentation technology we had access to that was widely used in classrooms in the 2000s. And so students now have TikTok and Snapchat and so many Flipgrid, so many tools that can be utilized from an engagement perspective to integrate their love of what is most important to them and what feels culturally responsive to them, as well as whatever is the content that they're expected to manipulate and utilize in some way. I think some of and this makes me think about the last podcast conversation Krista and I had with Mike Anderson, where we were talking about student engagement, and one of the things that I lifted was the World Economic Forum says like social media content development is one of the key fastest growing, areas that young people will need skill sets, as well as AI will need skill sets to really find great careers in those areas. And so I'm just brimming with all of these things that I'm thinking about and seeing what we're doing on the ground, and like all of that's rising for me. So none of that's a question. All of that is just more of things that I'm thinking about, in the evolution of our conversation. Yeah.
Monica, have you seen, like, what are your thoughts around that culturally responsive sustaining piece, and thinking about like where this might be trending with culturally responsive sustaining and SEL skill development? Like, you're always at the forefront of things. I mean, at least I look to your blog, your podcast, your resources, because you have that you put out a ton of free content, which I think is incredible. And so I'm always leveraging and like signing up to grab these and think about how can I use what you're learning to improve my own practice. And so what are you seeing as kind of trending, or where do you foresee this going?
Yeah, I think two things that are important with that question. The first is that, we're talking about this generative AI, right? But where is it generating this content from? And it's really going out online and pulling from lots of different sources. And one of the big issues there is the bias that's present, right? So if it's pulling information from sources that have bias, right, that they're regenerating or making new novel content that has that, right, as part of the foundation. So I think it's really important when talking about this to not just acknowledge it, but say this is something that we're mindful of and we keep in our, our own practice when we're editing something that might come out, or questioning and saying, I don't know if that's really the right angle here, right? So there's that piece that I think is really important to consider when talking about culturally responsive teaching, for sure. And then the second piece that connects back to your question, around SEL components, this is something that you may find, interesting as you both are exploring this type of chatbot technology. One thing I've done a lot of is using adjectives in my prompts. So I might write an email and, it might skew a little exclamation point or friendly heavy, right? And maybe I need it to be a little more serious, right? A little more professional. Or maybe I wrote something and I'm like, this is landing a little bit harder than I want it to. And it needs to be a little bit more friendly, or it needs to be a little lighter, or it's too wordy, needs to be more concise, right? So right there, I just threw 5 or 6 adjectives at you. So when I'm in this chatbot technology, I can copy and paste a piece or chunk or all of my writing and say, make this more fill in the blank. So if you are thinking about how you're responding to anyone that you're working with, and you have your specific SEL goals in mind, maybe for even a particular member of your community, that you're mindful of your tone, or you want to make sure that things feel very, a certain way, or you're responding to feedback you've gotten from someone or a lot of people, right? To make sure your communication feels more inclusive and just ready for anyone. That might be something that you're using this type of technology for too, to say, rewrite this so it's more concise, put this in bullet points so it's less confusing for someone, make sure this feels friendly and inviting for, and you might even say the kind of person, like their role or something about them that's important for them to know, for a family member who's never visited our campus before, right? Like whatever it is, like I think that's a really neat opportunity to think about utilizing this for specific SEL goals that you might have.
It got me thinking what you've said about Grammarly. And that was for my dissertation writing last year, because you could pick who your audience was, what type of tone you needed, if it was formal or informal writing. And so this is extended because now it's also drawing upon already created content and it's curating it.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Craig, I think you were about to ask something, and then I saw you go for your drink there. So
No, you're good. You're good. I'm curious. I know for me, sorry, I do have curiosity, but I also am taking a step back for a moment. And I'm thinking about, some of what I heard a number of my teachers share. Um, I'm a K-8 school leader. We have about 100 teachers in my community, or actually, I mean, I consider them all teachers, even though some of them are like paraprofessionals, teaching associates, and we have leads as well and specialists. And so at this point, we're at the last leg of our year, and I know that there will be some conversations about, well, what do we do next year to do things differently? In some schools, I know like next month will be coming to a close. So I'm really thinking about, the heart of teachers who are trying to figure out, well, at this point, they'll be already starting some new things. So I am wondering, for teachers today who want to integrate more technologies into their day-to-day, some teachers at this point will have already started something new by the time they hear this podcast. But they may be interested in taking on like one new nugget. They may be interested in following one new podcast or trying one new practice. What would be your recommendations on where they can get plugged in and tap into something new, but not feel overwhelmed by so many things that are out there right now?
Yeah, there is just so much out there, right? I've already mentioned, right? I've got a newsletter that I push out every week with a whole bunch of new things to consider. And oftentimes, if I give a presentation that has a number at the beginning, because a lot of them do, like 15 ways or 14 of these, I'll tell people at the beginning, I'll remind them in the middle, and I'll say it at the end. Do not do all of these. Like choose two, right? Like make it count. And so that's what I would share with educators who are looking for kind of that one thing, right? Is just choose one thing, but make that thing be something that you can come back to multiple times, that you can really build a routine around. And so there's two different kinds of things that I put into that category. One would be a creativity tool. So something that's open-ended, as I like to think of it, as like a blank canvas or choose your own adventure. I could use this for 10 projects forever with first graders and with eighth graders, right? Like something that's very flexible. That could be something like Adobe Express or Book Creator. I've done work with both of their teams and love what you can do in there. It could be Google Slides, right? That is also super flexible. Even just changing the slide shape, right, or the page layout makes it almost feel like a whole different creativity tool. And so that would be one big suggestion, is choosing that one thing you can come back to over and over again throughout the school year. Layer on different features, but your content can then stay focused. You're not worried about introducing a brand new tool that you yourself might be building confidence and capacity around. So it could be a creativity piece, or maybe it's an assessment routine that you're coming to. So maybe it is revisiting something where it's a new way to think about exit slips. We don't do it every day, but we do it twice a week throughout the whole quarter, right? So something where you can build a routine that you're coming back to this thing. It's going to help with your personal buy-in. It's going to help with students feeling comfortable in that space. And it's going to really save you a lot of time for introducing or even just finding something new.
Thank you.
I was going to ask while you were talking, I'm like, I wonder what her favorite go-tos are. And you've just named a couple. And I know that your newsletters and the work that you put out are always sharing new tools. I have a question, because I've been seeing a lot on Twitter back and forth about people who have this concern about the AI and students cheating, students putting things in here. And I've heard some really creative ideas on how to reframe them. And I know that we talked about how can we extend things so that it's a starting point. And I'm wondering if we can maybe revisit that for a moment, and perhaps what advice might you give one of those teachers who's like, but the kids are going to cheat. They're going to like, how could we reframe that a little bit? Or maybe what considerations might they think about that could help them embrace some of this a little bit more and leverage the good that could happen from it?
Yeah, well, I mentioned the Google example before, and I do think that that is a good reminder to ways we might have felt in the past, but I don't think it's exactly the same, right? When we talk about, I can't the kids just Google this? And a lot of what we have all done in the past few decades, right, is around making deeper questions, having things kids can't Google the answer to, right? And this complicates it more than just a little bit. So I want to acknowledge that the power of that comparison, but the limitation that that comparison has at the same time. So that being said, there are things that have been out there for a bit now, like plagiarism detection software. There's things now that are coming on the scene that have generative AI created content in mind. I think that's going to continue to increase. I don't know that that's really going to address the problem in full. I think it's one piece of the pie, right? But even with that, I think it's really not about the gotcha. It's about the conversations that you would have around this, right? What can we talk about with digital citizenship? Or I notice that there's a lot of overlap here. Let's talk about how this is a tool that we can use to get a lot of great ideas, but then we expand upon that, right? Or yeah, I use this today to help us write a letter that I sent out to families last week. It really helped me figure out all the things so I didn't forget what to include in our reminder email, right? And maybe there's transparency that you're having that conversation with students, but you're saying, but I knew that this wasn't perfect because I wanted to put this in, or, right? So these are the kind of transparent conversations that are easier said than done, but do allow us to build in what we've always said is important, right? Digital citizenship skills, transferable skills. A lot of the conversations around AI have not been that this is going to replace everyone's job, but it might replace some people who don't learn how to use this, right, at their job in the future. I don't think we're there now, but I understand that sentiment when people talk about it. So I think it's silly to ignore it in its entirety. It doesn't have to be a conversation that waits until that, what is this that you just turned in, right, to a group of 10th graders. But I do think it's important that we see, what's possible. And that's one of the reasons why in my work has been more around what can teachers do with this, right? Because I think that for me, I like being hands-on to learn, to get that context so that I can then take that next step. So a lot of my work around how can teachers use this is kind of two-part. I don't mean to think of it as being sneaky because I think I'm pretty transparent about it, right? But part of it is that teacher efficiency component. But I do think that kind of side aspect of it is, well, now we know what we can do in here. So now we can anticipate what students might do in here, and we can have deeper conversations with this knowledge base and experience that, provide more value to that conversation.
And if I can add in, to me, that really wraps into social emotional learning. That for me, education today is co-created. That the way I used to teach my first couple years, I got to be the content expert because students didn't have access to the content. And now, how is this shifting? And you said that conversation piece is so critical. And how can we leverage each other's strengths in the classroom to really build some amazing learning experiences together? Thank you.
Yeah. I would add one of the, things that still resonates with me from our last podcast, and also something that it seems like there's some really great themes here that I'm also connecting with our conversation with Monica, is how do we engage students in meaningful learning experiences where they can tap into, integrate in a meaningful way these technologies and these mediums that will help them, will continue to cultivate them as co-creators, content, developers, but also engage in these mediums that they are already utilizing. If you just use the word, ALEXA, because I know she'll.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, like you doing that, like that is actually a fundamental part of your life experience because they exist, as well as Siri and other things. And so what I have found to be most important is, how do we engage students in problem solving? Like they have real life things that are going on in their lives right now. The water crisis may be something that fundamentally is happening in Flint, Michigan. It may be happening in California, but how can I in Boston be having that conversation here? And anytime that there's a drought here, people talk about water conservation. So it may not be that we're talking about the quality of water that's in Flint. We may not be talking about the drought conditions in California and the wildfires, but we all have to deal with global change, climate change. And so how are we getting students to utilize these technologies to create content that can be an advocate arm or voice? Or how can we do that from a perspective of persuasion to their family, to their grandma, like, hey, we can't just have water on all day.
Right.
So, that's what I'm kind of making connections with as a theme today in this conversation. And I know we talked about it with Mike, on the last podcast. So one of the questions that we love to ask all of our podcasts, guests, Monica, is, what do you feel is your superpower at this point? We know you have many. We see the magic across the global stage, but what would you identify as your SEL or your just day-to-day superpower?
Gosh, I would say my mission has always been to try to make teachers' lives easier by giving actionable information. So keeping things actionable and doable. I love big ideas, but helping people put those big ideas into an action right away. That's probably where I'd put my my little class tech tips superpower hat on, if you will.
Nice.
Yes, cheers to that.
So, Monica, we're coming to a close because I'm looking at Krista leaning back and forth. So I'm also curious.
Oh no, my hair just rocks.
Uh-huh.
I'm a student, right? When people are like, sit up straight, don't move. I'm like, oh man, like got armrests I want to move around, and yeah.
Where can people connect with you who want to continue to, if they're not already plugged into your newsletter, if they're not already connected with you in so many different platforms, but what if they're like, hey, I need to catch up with Monica today because I heard her on this podcast. Where would you suggest people start?
Well, you can find me at classtechtips.com. That's where everything is. The Easy EdTech podcast, which is on the podcast places, is also there on the blog. That website has a free stuff button, which includes a ChatGPT prompts for teachers download that might go along well with our conversation today. And then at Class Tech Tips and all the social places, Twitter still, as we're recording this, Instagram and all the places where I love to share.
And I just want to add in too that you've put out some really amazing resources around utilizing ChatGPT to make our lives easier. And so we're going to have those resources attached to the podcast. So make sure you check that out as well.
All right, SEL and EDU family, we are coming to a close on this conversation just for a moment, but this conversation will continue, beyond this moment here. We have had the pleasure and honor of one of the world's just finest educators and leaders in this work, Dr. Monica Burns, EdTech and curriculum consultant, has some incredible books and more out in the ether. So you better make sure you connect, you get on the newsletter, you take part in some of the great workshops, classes, workshops, and more. I think just having a Dr. Monica Burns in your life is just value add times 1,000.
Absolutely.
So until we come back together again, please hold yourself and others you hold dear real tight. And we are going to continue to march forward together, united in love in the SEL and EDU light. We love you. You take care.